The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. This is Justin Foster, co-CMO at Loop1. We will start this webinar in about 3 minutes. Just let everybody get logged in, download the GoToWebinar client if you don't have it. So we're excited that you're all joining, and we'll circle back with you in 2 to 3 minutes. Thanks. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Justin Foster. I'm the co-CMO at Loop1 here. We're super excited to have our first webinar of 2018, and this is the first of a series of 3 that we'll be presenting over the next few months. The next one is next month on dashboards, but this one is on alert noise. And part of our goal with Loop1 is that you get to experience what we refer to as engineered insights. And engineered insights to us is this healthy, fresh perspective at looking at data systems, the way things operate from a unique perspective. And we call this collective intelligence of Loop1, the Loop1 mind. And that is our team members, of course, our clients, and our partners. So one of our team members today is Chrystal Taylor, and so good morning, Chrystal.
Good morning.
Thank you for agreeing to be our subject matter expert today. When we ran this idea of alert noise webinar by Bill and Jason, they were like, Chrystal, she's it. So thank you for being open to doing this. It's really appreciated.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, a little bit of an introduction. Chrystal is an MSE III and a managed services team lead here at Loop1, and she is a subject matter expert on SolarWinds Orion products, and she's an MVP on THWACK. So if you're on THWACK and want to interact with her, that would be great. And she is really famous around here for the depth of her SolarWinds knowledge. So we're excited to have you on. A bit of housekeeping. You have a control panel. If you have questions that you want Chrystal to answer, we just go ahead and post them in the control panel. And when we get to the end of Chrystal, your formal presentation, we'll go through the questions and make sure they get answered. That's number 1. Number 2 is if you just have general questions, you can post them in the chat. And so I think that's it. Where you're sitting and finding the restrooms, that's up to you. So we don't have to worry about that in webinars. So I'll kick it over to you, Chrystal. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. As Justin stated, I'm Chrystal Taylor. I've been working with Loop1 and the SolarWinds products for a little over 7 years now. I have lots of experience working with lots of different sized environments, enterprise level, small companies, schools, federal organizations. We have all kinds of different clients, including sizes and what their needs are, and everyone has an alerting strategy, or they should develop one. And part of that includes reducing the alert noise in your environment using a strategy. So that's what I want to talk about today. And as Justin mentioned, we are going to answer questions at the end. There'll be a Q&A segment at the end, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions as time allows. So let's jump right into it. All right. Just a little bit about me. That's my THWACK handle if you want to find me on SolarWinds Slack. I am an MVP and have been for a little over 6 years. And just a little bit about me more that I'm a subject matter expert on most SolarWinds products, including Login Event Manager, all of the Orion products, and a few others here and there, Virtualization Manager, which is now an Orion product. So if you have questions, please hit me up on SolarWinds Slack. All right, so there's a few topics that I want to cover today. There's a lot that encompasses an alerting strategy. We're going to talk about a couple of things, but there are going to be other things that you might think of later that are going to be included in your alerting strategy. But I really want to focus on a couple of things as we're limited on time today. So first of all, I'd like to focus on targeted alerting. Your first question when you're developing an alert or an alerting strategy is, who's your target? Who's the audience? Who's going to be reading these emails that come in or looking at these dashboards if it's going to a dashboard or a help desk or a ticketing system? Those are all important questions. The information that is required for those is going to be different. And sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. It doesn't matter the size of your audience, the information that's required will be dependent on who that audience is. If you're sending an email to management, you want to make sure that they have the information that they need. And if you're sending it to a ticketing system, then you need to make sure it's actionable from the ticket. So there's definitely, that's definitely going to be a consideration when you're creating your alerts and what alerts are created. You don't want to have unnecessary alerts going to your ticketing system or to management, because then your manager might come down on you and say, hey, what's going on? I'm getting all these emails. I don't know what this is. Why aren't you working on it? And nobody wants that. You also want to make sure that the information that they're getting and the emails that they're getting are not getting relegated to the trash bin or to a folder that has 10,000 unread messages in it. I've seen both in different sized environments, and you definitely don't want that to be what people are doing with the alerts. You want it to make sure that it is actionable, that it has all the information necessary to execute action as much as possible. So if you get that email and it has your information in there, it needs to have, if it's a note down, for instance, you want to make sure it has the system name. You want to make sure that it has a timestamp on it. If it has relevant applications, those are all things to consider when you're including that information in your alert and making sure it goes to the right person, whether that be an application owner or management or ticketing system or what have you. If you have more of a smaller environment, most of your alerts are generally going to be going to your SolarWinds administrator, and that's probably not their only job. They probably are, also a systems administrator, or they're also a network admin, in any other IT generalist or something. They don't have full-time, they can't devote their time full-time to SolarWinds, so they need to make sure that their alerts that they're receiving are actionable and necessary to kind of reduce the amount of time that they have to go hunting down that information. So that is what we mean by actionable alerting. We want to make sure that when you get that email, you can immediately take action on it. And I also want to talk about custom properties. If you have SolarWinds products, then you might be familiar with their custom property system. Custom properties are hugely valuable within SolarWinds. They can be used anywhere on the platform, including reports, dashboards, alerts, you just all kinds of places in your groupings. It's hugely important to develop a correct strategy when using those custom properties. Some examples of custom properties that we've seen are, if for an interface custom property, you might have a primary and backup WAN. You don't necessarily want to be alerted on the backup WAN if the primary WAN is up, but you do want to be notified if the backup WAN comes up. That might be something that you need to be set up. For instance, you might need just informational custom properties. You might have it filled out for for server teams, or the owner of the alert, or the device. You might have that information in there. You can also use them to prevent alert storms by using the alert email, and you can fill that in for the CC and the BCC. So any of those can be pulled in via custom property, and that allows you to be more dynamic and avoid setting off an alert storm when you change those emails. So if you do need to change an email address because someone's left the company, or because they've moved teams, they're no longer responsible for those devices, then you would want to change the custom property versus changing every single individual alert that that person may have been responsible for. It saves time, and it also avoids getting a whole bunch of new alerts triggered, because when you do edit your alerts, if you change your trigger, if you change any of the actions in there, then it is going to run it again. So it's going to run that through that trigger action again, and you can get alert storms when you're making those changes. So using a custom property avoids that. It'll only be for new alerts going forward, rather than re-triggering all of the alerts that are already triggered. So that's very useful. And a lot of times we see we'll pull in custom properties values from somewhere else, do a link to a CMDB database and pull in information on serial numbers or any other information that might be relevant, and then use that in your ticketing system alerts, in your actionable alerts, to make sure that they have all that relevant information. A lot of it is available in SolarWinds with your polling, and some stuff, it might just be text-based. It might just be information that you need to have in there for your own purposes. Like I said, maybe just having a list of backup WANs and primary WANs, or if you have multiple routers, you might have for remote sites, you need a primary router and a backup router. Anything like that you would need to have kind of a custom property set for, and then it'll allow you to use that anywhere across the platform, which is hugely useful. There's additional alerting strategies aside from that. Like I said, there's all kinds of things. So I've put up a list here of some additional things that can be used. Escalation protocols, so you can set up if no one has acknowledged or worked on the alert, or it's still triggering after 30 minutes or an hour, it needs to go to the tier 2, or it needs to go to their manager, or it needs to open up a higher priority ticket if you're using a ticketing system. You can use prioritization, so you can set critical alerts, warning alerts, and just informational alerts if you need those. But informational alerts are generally going to be ignored because they are informational. You can use that as well, that prioritization, to create dashboards, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, to create dashboards. So you can use that prioritization in multiple places, and you can do that as well, setting severity on your devices. So you have your production devices that are set as critical, and some of them are going to be not as critical because they're not hosting business critical applications, or they're not hosting business critical devices. So those are just some examples of using prioritization across your SolarWinds environment. The other thing is, if you want to use more generic alerting because you're not sure, you don't have very specific alerting that you need, you can use generic alerting and then use custom thresholds on your devices. So, setting your SQL servers to trigger on their memory on the default warning and critical thresholds may not be good for you. You might want to set it at 95% because SQL is notorious for chewing through memory. It automatically allocates itself as much memory as it can that is not being used by the OS. And in other situations, you might have a different threshold that you need set. You might have an Exchange server that is always going to be at a certain threshold, and if it goes over that threshold, then there's some kind of a problem going on. There might be an email storm going on over there. So custom thresholds can be hugely useful for keeping your alerts kind of generic, and using that with the custom property of your alert email can keep your emails generic, where you don't have to have nearly so many. And then the other recommendation that we have is using alert acknowledgement features. SolarWinds has an acknowledgement feature which allows you to ignore the next trigger of the alert if it's already been acknowledged. So someone can log in and say, I'm working on this, acknowledge that alert, and it won't continue triggering, and they won't keep getting emails, because that is noise. It is annoying. And if you're already working on a device, you don't want to receive multiple emails every time it triggers if you are working on it. And of course, there's more than that. You can use the muting strategies. You can use unmanagement for maintenance mode. There's a lot of additional things that you can take into consideration for alerting strategies. But those are just some of the things that we like to talk about. And I am going to demonstrate some of that in our lab environment. So let me just switch to that. There we go. And I'll log in here. This is our lab environment. There's a bunch of devices in here. It's not a large environment because it is a lab, but it will do what we are needing it to do today. And I'm just going to walk through a few steps of utilizing some of those alerting strategies that I discussed. Thinking about it. Here we go. So we can go over to our settings page. I'm just going to take a look real quick and kind of show you what we have out of the box, and including some of our own alerts that we've created. But out of the box, you have hundreds of alerts, depending on the amount of modules you have, hundreds of alerts that come out of the box, and they are useful, but they're very generic. So you definitely don't want to just start out with enabling all of especially if you're monitoring your production, your QA, your dev, and your test environments. I mean, test environments generally don't need alerting. Dev environments don't generally need alerting either. If you do want to set up alerting on those, then that's where a custom property could come into play, where you are able to parse out the ones that are in your dev environment and the ones that are in your production environment. So we can see, I mean, there's just 245 alerts in here already. Most of these are going to be the out-of-the-box alerts. And depending on the products, I mean, each product adds more alerts. So the more products you have, the more out-of-the-box alerts that there are going to be. And a lot of the times, even utilizing an alert strategy, you can copy an existing alert that SolarWinds has created out of the box for you and make modifications to it in order to accomplish the needs that you have, rather than creating a new one from scratch. But you may not need all of these out of the box alerts. It's just going to be a lot of noise if you set up all of them to email right away. And I want to take a look at some of those custom properties that we were talking about. And you can do that in your manage custom properties to create a new custom property. And we're going to create a new one today to kind of just differentiate. We have an alert email already, which I can show you here. That is going to be filled out on all of our devices. You can use comma separators to add multiple, or you can add distribution list email addresses in there as well. And that'll automatically be able to be used in your alerts, which I'll go through in just a minute. So if we create a new custom property, we want to create it based on nodes, but you can create it on multiple different types of properties in here. If you did want to use one for your applications or for your interface, as I mentioned earlier, for backup and primary WAN devices, any of those that are going to be useful for identifying, you can set up a custom property for. And the most commonly used ones are going to be either text-based or true-false. There are a couple of other options as well, but text-based and true-false, which is the yes/no, are going to tend to be the ones that are used most often. And the nice thing that SolarWinds does as well is it forces a value to be, you can force a value to be specified so that it's required to maintain your alerting strategy. Because if you have an alerting strategy, it needs to be consistent. Everyone needs to be doing it. If you have multiple administrators or multiple users that are able to add their devices in, you know, say you give someone from the SQL team or the Exchange team rights to add their own devices in because you don't have time to do that, then you need to make sure that they're following and abiding by your strategies that you've developed in order to make your system work as optimally as possible. So you can set that this box that makes sure that it has to be specified. They won't be able to add a device without specifying that property. And as well, you can use this drop-down values in order to create a list that they have to choose from. If you're an admin, you can add to that list even from the Manage Nodes page. But that prevents fat fingering, misspellings, extra spaces. A lot of times you'll see that where if you created all of them, people are typing in on their own, then they either are not using capitalization or they're adding spaces or they didn't add a space and it's all mashed together in there. Any of that will prevent it from being able to be used universally. You'd have to include each one of those values in order to utilize it for an alert or anywhere across the board. It's going to, because it's seen as different. I mean, the text is different, capitalization is different, or spacing is different, even though it's the same thing. So you can have SQL Server with a space, you can have SQL Server with no spaces. Someone might just put SQL, someone might put SQL in lowercase, and then you got 4 different values that are all for the same block of servers or block of machines or applications or whatever you're using it for. And then that kind of just adds more complexity than you need. So if you create a drop-down list for that kind of thing, so we're just going to create a test custom property. So we'll say test 1, and we'll say test 2, and test 3. Create those values, and if I'm an admin, and if you're an admin and you log in, you can go and add additional values to that at any time. So we're going to call this webinar test. You can add a description. That description might be useful for anybody else that needs to utilize this custom property in the future. If you're not always going to be the administrator, or if you're setting it up for somebody and someone else is going to take it over after they've been trained, or there's just multiple admins, a description might be helpful to help them understand what you're using it for. And then these are the options of where you're going to be able to use it. As I said, you can use it across the site. Custom properties can be used across the site, and that's quite useful. So I'm going to leave that all that way, and we're going to go ahead and add this custom property. As you can see, it gave me an error because spaces are not allowed. So I took out my space, we're able to move forward, and we can automatically start assigning it. Now, I don't have, because this is just a test, I don't have a set of criteria I'm working from, so I'm just going to add it to them based on status, but you can base it off of another custom property. You can base it off of something else if you have device names that are going to be useful. So, if you have SQL, or we've got some SQL machines that have SQL in the name. If you have a naming convention or an IP schema, you can use that as well. But I don't have a criteria, so I'm going to select all the F1s, and we're going to select these and assign them to test 1. And then we're going to select some more and assign them to test 2, just so we can see how easy it is to add them in here. And finally, we'll do these to test 3. And obviously, in most cases, status is probably not going to be how you're going to organize these to assign custom properties. It doesn't make a lot of sense for most cases. Since this is just a test, that makes it a little bit easier on me for creating this. So that is what I'm going to use. And you can add more to this at any time. So if you want to make changes, you can use your manage nodes section, manage entities section to make changes to those values that have been assigned, or you can use your custom property editor to change the values as well in the view and edit values. So we've got our new webinar test custom property that we've set up, and we also have our alert email property that we've set up. And I'll show you here the values that we have. I've set them all to a generic email address because I don't want to share out people's email addresses. That would be no fun. But you can come in here, you can do comma separated to use them in your alerts as well. So if I wanted to make a couple of changes, and let's just change these. We can change these to, and then comma separate and add another one, as many as we want into that list. So now we've got, if I can expand this a little bit, and it's not gonna let me, but that's okay. But now we've got these two that have the additional custom property, additional email in our custom property. So we're gonna save that. We've made our changes. Now we can go over to creating an alert. So let's go over to our alerts. Creating an alert is quite fast if you know what you're looking for. If you're using custom properties, and the more detailed that you want to get with your alert, the longer it's going to take you to create it. But once it's created, it's kind of done, especially if you're using custom properties like alert email, and you're maintaining those custom properties and that alert strategy across the board. Makes it easier where you're not going to have to change it later. If your alerting strategy changes, you'll have to make changes to all of your alerts. But for the meantime, you should be all right. So we're gonna call this webinar test. Descriptions can be quite useful, again, for if you're not going to always be that SolarWinds admin, or you might forget what you created this for later. The name is important, and the description will be important to help people. And we'll say this is a test for the webinar. And that way they'll know what it's for. So if you had created this for the SQL team, or if at the request of somebody, that is always a useful information to have in here. That way later on, if that person leaves the company, or if for some reason you don't need it anymore, the machine's been decommissioned, or the applications have been changed, or any of that information, they're easier to kind of jump in there and see, hey, someone else created this alert, but there's a description, so now I can see what this was for, rather than having to kind of dig into the trigger conditions and try and figure it out. That's no fun, and it takes a lot of time. There's also alerting custom properties, which you can use for organizing your alerts. We're not gonna use that right now, but you can use alert custom properties and alert limitations. Those are additional strategies around alerting that can be used. So we'll create our trigger condition, and I'm gonna create kind of a generic alert here, just for our purposes of showing you how you can use these. And then we will add our custom property down here to webinar test. If we wanted to add another one, we can add another one in here for, let's say, our site. I don't know that we have any sites in here, but let's say site equals X. And we can remove these. You can use and/or conditions to add some complexity to your alerts. So if we wanted to say, if, let's go back to our webinar test. So we can say if it's equal to test 1 or test 3, we can add that and drag it around, kind of give them in here. That gives a little bit more complexity, so where we can create more generic alerts and not have to create as many specific alerts. And then you can use this operation here for a condition must exist for a certain amount of time. If you have, a lot of times you want to do that for devices that go down a lot, or if they are known to have high spikes on their CPU or memory utilization, because it's a active box, then you might want to say if it's over a certain threshold for a certain amount of time, and that is what you would use that condition for. Your reset is going to be how it determines that the trigger is no longer true. So typically you can stick with the recommended. You can also use a special reset condition if you want to say that if it's, for instance, if it's a threshold for resource consumption, then you can say, we're going to trigger this alert when it's at 95%, but I don't want to reset it until it's gone back below 85% or something like that. And you can use a special reset for that. Time of day, if you do want to use different alerts for nights and weekends, for instance, or if you have shifts that change, then you might want to use different times of day. We're going to enable this for all the time, not use a specific schedule. And then our trigger actions is really where we're going to see the value of creating meaningful alerts, creating alerts that are actionable. And this is where we're going to do that. So that's going to be here in our actions. It automatically is going to create a message with the alert, and that's going to be in the Orion console. And this is where that alert name is very useful. It's going to be included in your emails as well. So if you do need to find something later, if there's some problem where a variable wasn't pulled in because the node is down and you got a CPU alert, or any other thing like that where you're not sure where this alert came from, having that alert name included in the email will be hugely critical to finding that information later. So you can go back and maybe you need to edit it because it's triggering on something that you weren't expecting it to. Having that information included in the email will allow you to know which alert was triggering. So we are going to call this our webinar test action. And I'm not going to fill this in yet because I'm going to go pull that variable. So I'm going to use this insert variable option here. And I'm going to go choose from my nodes. And right away, you can see right here that there is an output preview. So there's nothing showing here because there's no values for that for this device. But you can change this to the device that you know is going to trigger this alert to make sure that you're going to get the information that you need. So we're going to go ahead and look in here for our alert email custom property, which is right here. We can see for this device, it's nobody@nowhere.com. And that is going to give us this information right here. This is our variable information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to cancel out of this and I'm going to go back up to my recipients and I'm going to add that right into my recipients list. And you can add a CC and a BCC using that same information, or if you want to create multiple custom properties for a CC and a BCC, you can use that there as well. All right, so now we've got our recipients set. Now we can work on the information in our alerts. So right now we have, it's very generic. They automatically populate a lot of information in here for you. A lot of this you're gonna wanna keep depending on your audience. So you have URLs for the information in Orion, for the alert information for the device, and you can acknowledge it straight from your email. And as well, like I said, it includes the alert name in here and your polling engine if you're interested in that information. If you only have one polling engine, that might not be something that you need to keep in there. It's just going to be more noise inside the alert. So you may want to remove that from your fields, but it's automatically populated on each one. So you may not need to bother with it. So what you can see here, this is the information that we're looking at. Right now, this email, if it comes through, is going to say an issue has been detected, and it's going to give you a date, time, and the information on the device. It doesn't tell you a whole lot. It doesn't even tell you that the status is down, which is what our alert is for. It doesn't give you a lot of information. So what we want to do is we want to make changes to this to make it more meaningful to the recipient. So things that are useful to keep, you want to keep that triggering date time in there. The reason why you want to keep that is so you can monitor. If you have a device that is going up and down, and you want to keep track of that, or somebody else needs to keep track of that, for instance, in a ticketing system, that timestamp is going to be hugely useful later on. Things that you want to keep: machine type, not generally important information to include in an alert for most people. The things that are mostly important are going to be the device name. If it's an interface or a volume alert, then you need to include the name of that information in there. So the name of the interface or the name of the disk drive. And then any information pertaining to that alert. So DNS entries might not be important. IP addresses can be important, especially if you are in an environment where you have maybe a network admin is going to be more familiar with the IP addresses of machines than a server admin might be more familiar with the DNS name. So including the node name and the IP address are going to be useful for that information. So we're going to leave that there. We're going to take out, I'm going to take out this machine type information, and I am going to take out this an issue has been detected information. And we're going to just change this. And we can include a combination of plain text and alert variables to pull in dynamic information. And you want to make sure that you include all the proper information. So we're going to say that this device right here, I'm going to use the IP address as well. And then I'm going to remove all this. So I'm going to say that device and this IP address And then we're going to put the status because this is a status alert. So we're going to come in here and we're going to get the status. And you can favorite some of these so that they show up quickly on the side here. I don't have any that are favorited just because we use this for testing purposes and it's not required. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to look for status. And all of your other information you can see is in here. We're using the same device that we used to test before for our variables to see what kind of output it's going to give us. And I just passed it. And our status there is up. If we want to include any additional information, if we want to include, for instance, our resource information, we can add that in as well. So I can grab multiple variables at a time and move them around inside the alert email body. So let's see. So if we wanted to include percent loss, or if we wanted to include percent memory available or percent memory used or any of that information, any other information, any of your custom property information. So we can come down here and I can find a webinar test, which is not there. So switch to variable type, not type, category. Variable category. And we're going to go back over here to node. Yeah, you can switch to category so you can get a more organized view rather than no organization there. We have our nodes custom properties here. And we want to include, oh, that's interesting. That is probably a problem we're having, but I will ignore that. You can include any of your custom property information in there. So if we had site information, which we don't currently, but if we had site information, we can include that department. We can include all of that information in here. We're going to insert the variables. Now it's just a big jumble. So we've got, right now we've got our device name and the IP address and the status. So we can make that a sentence. And then we can say, we can just include other information at will. So percent loss, and then you can see what that is. Current percent memory utilization. Any information you want to include can be included. These variables are going to populate automatically when the alert is triggered on the device that triggered it. So that's just basically what we got there. Now our subject line can be hugely important. A lot of times people will ignore alerts that come in that just have generic information. They want it to be very specific. So instead of having this information up here, we can say, let's just take that out. We can say, we've got alert, say caption, which is our device name, and give it the status here. That's what we really want to know. We want to know right away, and then we can dig into it to get the additional information. So that's it. You can change your importance that you trigger the email on if you need to have high priority emails. Again, kind of going back to that prioritization. And then if you need time of day scheduling, so if you want to set one alert up, but you want to have different emails sent out to different people depending on time of day or after hours, that kind of thing, you can make multiple email actions that have different time of day set. And then our execution settings are important. This goes back to that acknowledgement strategy where it won't trigger again if it's already been acknowledged. So if someone has come in here and said, hey, I'm working on that, let's acknowledge it, and then we'll move forward, and then it won't continue triggering after that. And then you can also set repeat actions if you are concerned, like this is a high priority device, if it's still not been fixed after 30 minutes or however long that you need to set that for, you can have it keep repeating until someone picks it up or somebody acknowledges it. So we're going to go ahead and add that. If we wanted to do a simulation, we want to see a test, we'll pick a device here. Like for instance, this one's already down. So let's do a simulation. And then it populates those variables for us. So what we don't see, some of them we don't see like this, there's no information in it filled out for those custom property fields, so it's not there. This trigger.never is because it hasn't been triggered. So once it is triggered, it will have that information in there. as far as the date and time. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. Now you can add escalation levels in here as well. If you want to escalate to a tier 2 or management after a certain amount of time has passed, you can add an escalation level in there and add actions and after a wait time. We're not going to add an escalation to this alert. And then if you want to receive a notification when it's been reset, so once it's passed, once it's gone back down below its thresholds or once it's gone back up, you can set reset actions as well. I find that most companies don't really do that because it just generates more noise for them. But if you are interested in it, there are lots of reasons why you might want to receive that. If somebody else is working on it, then you can know it's been taken care of afterwards. So then we get to a kind of summary page. It tells us everything about the alert we just created, all the information that we put in, including what our trigger is, and then what our reset is, and what kind of actions we've set up. And then it tells you over here on the right-hand corner if it'll be triggered on anything immediately. And this right now is not going to be triggered on anything. But if we were to set it for something that was going to be triggered on, you'd be able to click a button here and it will pop up a list that shows you everything that it's going to currently trigger on to a point. It has limitations. It doesn't show, I think there's a limitation on how many items it'll show in that list. So if it's a huge amount of things, you might want to reconsider what you're alerting on. So we're just going to go ahead and submit this. It's going to be a created alert, and that is the process we would use. So now if we wanted to make changes to whoever is assigned to that device that's going to be triggered on, then we can make changes in either manage nodes or our custom properties page instead of changing our alert and triggering it off again. And that is just a quick overview of some of the alerting strategies that you can use moving forward and kind of settle out your alerts instead of using all of those out-of-the-box alerts. So we'll go back to my presentation.
And while you're transitioning, we do have a poll for y'all, which is you can see up on the screen. You can just use the GoToWebinar control panel, and the question is, who are the consumers of your alerts? And so while Chrystal is transitioning back to her deck, please go ahead and answer that. Lots of answers pouring in, Chrystal.
Oh, that's good. That's good. We want to get those poll questions. Kind of helps think about our alerting strategies.
Yeah, the top answer, just for everyone, if you're curious, is 47% of you say a combination of the above or other. So we'll go ahead and close that poll, and I'll kick it back over to you.
All right. All right, so we'll get those answers. So we have reached our Q&A portion. If you have questions, please send them in. And then we have a few here, if I can get this to expand.
Yeah, the first, you want me to go ahead and read them so the audience can hear?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is from John, and he says, I have a Windows domain environment with mostly laptops plugged into Cisco switches. I would like to get an alert if or when someone that has a non-domain joined computer plugs into one of my switches. And he has more behind the question, but the main question is is that something that can be created based off of the scenario that he gave?
Sure. So, well, we'd have to get some kind of a notification or be monitoring something to tell us that it's not been joined to the domain in order to get that notification. We could set it up a couple of different ways. If you're using DNS in your environment and all of your other devices will be using DNS and something pops up that doesn't have DNS, you can trigger an alert based on that. If you want to go a different route with it, though, you can utilize maybe an events monitor to do that, or maybe a script monitor to check for devices not on the domain and set it up to alert you that way. There's a couple of different ways you could probably approach that.
Great. Another one came up from Connor. So we need some of our servers to monitor interfaces and hardware. Often when the node goes down, we get a barrage of alerts for the interfaces and the hardware going into an unknown state. How would you best protect against this happening?
So you can use dependencies. There's supposed to be automatic dependencies in SolarWinds created to prevent that from happening, so that when your node goes down, everything that's a child object of that node shouldn't be alerting you. If it is still alerting you, you can add a condition to your alerts that just states when the node is down to not notify you. And that's just a quick change to your alerting strategy that adds, when the device is down, I don't want to receive emails on the interfaces and all that, because obviously if the device is down, so are all of the interfaces and volumes and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a quick fix.
Sure. So we're going to pull up another poll. It's a quick one as well. And just a simple question. Do you use the alert acknowledgement system? Yes, no, or sometimes? And as Chrystal mentioned, if you have other questions, go ahead. We have plenty of time. If you have other questions, please post them in the questions section of the control panel. And
yes, absolutely.
And while people are responding to that survey, another question came in from Patrick. Is sites now a standard property in SolarWinds? If so, what impact would we have in creating it what impact would we have creating it many moons ago? Not quite sure how to answer that one, but I'll throw that one to you.
So if you already had a site custom property, it's not going to be affected by the one that's been default added. It's not going to make any difference to you. If it is, if they are utilizing the same name, you might run into a conflict. So you might need to change the name slightly on your custom property to be site name or something similar where it's not exactly the same. You definitely want to make sure that you're not having any conflict there. But otherwise, it shouldn't affect anything that you've already set up. If it is affecting things that you've set up because it's not filled out for the default custom property, then you probably want to make a little bit of a change to the name to make sure that yours is maintained, or just update the default and remove yours all entirely.
Okay. Great. Another question coming in. Is there a way to edit the default email template used for when creating a new alert?
There's not a way to change the default email template of the variables in that are included. You can change, there are variables utilized for like a default email address that if you wanted to include that. But for the template, as far as I know, no, there's no way to do that right now.
Okay. And boy, the questions are pouring in. This is great. Can the text of an alert on an application have variables or values in the alert from different groups, like nodes or alerts?
Yes. So it's going to be, what you're able to use is going to be dependent on the type of property that you've triggered on. So if you set your alert to trigger on a node value like I did, which was node status, it's not going to automatically pull in that information for the child objects or anything like that. But you can use, if the variables are not shown for you there, if you create an alert based on like an interface, the node properties, the parent properties are going to be available to you for any of that situation. So a node interface, a volume, that you'll also be able to pull those variables in. If it's a node alert, though, you'll probably have to use the custom variables. I didn't show that off, but you can, SolarWinds does allow you to create custom SQL or custom SWCL, which is the SolarWinds query language, to pull any information from the database in. So you can use, and you can use other variables in there to pull that information. So if you have something custom from a different table in the database that you need to pull into your alert, you can definitely make that work. It just takes a little bit more tweaking on the front end.
Okay, let's do one more question, then we'll pull up our last poll. But this question, Chrystal, is if you have conflicting alerts, which takes priority?
If you have conflicting alerts, they should both trigger.
Okay.
Alerts don't take priority in that manner. There's not a priority. Like I know in manage accounts and all that, there is a priority as far as the numbering. So whatever's higher on the list takes priority. But for alerting, they'll just both trigger. Great.
So the next and final poll that we have is, do you currently utilize custom properties in your environment? And you can see your yes, no, not in alerts, but elsewhere. I prefer only groups. And while people are answering, and we'll go to this question here, can the text of an alert, oops, I already asked that one, sorry. Here we go. If an alert is critical, will it continue to trigger emails if acknowledged? How do we stop that?
It shouldn't. If it is still triggering, then likely that box is not checked inside your actions where it says not to continue triggering the alert if it's been acknowledged. It won't continue to take those actions. And so you probably just need to edit the actions of the alert that's still triggering, and then make sure that that box is checked. And if it is checked, then that may be a problem that you're having in your environment. You might need to investigate that. The alert itself will continue to go up and down as the conditions are met. So if it's resetting and then re-triggering, then you are still going to get a new email because it's considered a new trigger.
Okay, great. This one is, if I have an alert on 10 gig interfaces with a don't alert for 24 hours after the first alert set, will that alert stop other 10 gig interfaces with different interface names from alerting?
No. As long as because the alert is triggered on the object, it should only prevent it for that object. So it's considered a trigger each time that it is fired off. So if it fires off for interface A, it's not going to prevent interface B from being sent.
Okay. More questions. Awesome. Can you, by the way, this is being recorded, so you'll hear all of Chrystal's answers and you can listen to it. We'll be sending this out early next week. It says, can you use SNMP location info to populate the site property automatically?
Possibly. That's more of it's probably going to require a script to do that. I think we have, our developer has done that for a couple of clients. So I'm pretty sure that it's possible. You just need a script to do it. So it's not going to do it dynamically. You probably have to update it on your own or have a script run on a schedule.
Great. What kind of groups can be defined to use, and where can we define them?
Groups. Groups can be defined in the Manage Groups section, and you can include any kind of different entities in there. So you can include applications, interfaces, nodes, all of that in there. You can also utilize kind of a dynamic filter in order to pull stuff in automatically based on name or IP or a custom property. The only thing with groups is in the alerting, if you're using groups for alerting, it does limit you a bit more than a custom property would, as far as what you're going to be able to pull in there without using a custom variable.
Great. And then finally, can we populate an alert with the output of a report?
Can you populate an alert with the output of a report? Yes. I mean, you can just include the URL. If you wanted to include like a PDF copy of it, I'd have to look at it to know for sure. But I mean, you should be able to at least pull in the URL and open that up.
Okay, great. So just as we wrap up here, Chrystal, a question then is if someone has follow-ups, more questions for you, or someone on the Loop1 team, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you to get some more in-depth answers taken care of?
Sure. So you can reach out to me on THWACK at Chrystal T. Easy to find. I'm one of the THWACK MVPs, so you should be able to find me there. If you are looking for something more, you can email me directly. I'll put my email. We can put my email out there with the webinar information. But it's chrystal.taylor@loop1.com. And yeah, you can reach out to me with any of these questions. I'd be happy to answer.
Great. Thank you so much. So as we wind down here, wanted to let you know that as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that our next webinar is on Thursday, April 26th on dashboards. You'll be getting sign-up information for that with some links and Q&A and other things to kind of prepare you for participating in that webinar. And then we're interested in the marketing side of Loop1. We'd love to hear from you of what other topics you'd like us to cover. And you can do that by just emailing marketing@loop1.com. And we would love your suggestions because it helps us create these webinars in a way that is the most useful to contribute to the Loop1 mind that you are all part of. So thank you for your attendance, and thank you, Chrystal, for the excellent job. And we're excited to share the recording and the follow-up with you, and that'll go out early next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for spending this time with me and taking an hour out of your day to listen to me talk.
Awesome. Thanks.